Nick Cave and Andrew Dominik's new AI Elvis music video. Is this AI slop, or is it something that's actually kind of brilliant? We discuss that on today's episode of Atomic Wax.
When the needle drops and the groove gets hot, set your dial on the coolest spot. When the needle drops and the groove gets hot, set your dial on the coolest spot. When the rhythm hits like a sharpened axe, it's time for atomic wax.
I found Elvis in his room, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking worn and depressed. Without speaking, he rose and, while pacing back and forth, kept shaking his head in dismay. Finally, he declared firmly, all right, Larry. Just tell me the damn truth, man. What am I doing wrong, huh? What's wrong with me? Maybe God doesn't love me or something. Because all I know is that I read for hours every day, every night, ever since you got me started. I haven't stopped. I've been like a damned fiend or something. He paused, then pleaded. All I want is to know the truth, to know and experience God. I'm a searcher. That's what I'm all about. You woke that up in me, and ever since I started, I haven't had one experience, nothing. I really believe in all the spiritual teachings. I believe, only nothing happens, and I want it to. Oh man, I want it so bad. What the hell is wrong?
One of my favorite filmmakers is a Danish guy named Carl Theodor Dreyer. And Dreyer had a lifelong dream. He wanted to make a film out of the life story of Jesus. And Dreyer was a perfectionist. He wasn't just going to jump into a project of this magnitude. This was something that was going to take a lot of time, a lot of contemplation. There were a lot of riddles to solve, a lot of filmmaking techniques to discover if this was ever possibly going to turn out the way that he wanted it to. And maybe the greatest riddle of them all was this. How do you make a modern audience, especially for Dreyer, a post-World War II European modern audience that has just barely survived Nazi occupation, that has just witnessed the horrors of the concentration camps? An audience that has every right to be cynical about the nature of humanity and skeptical about the idea of a just and loving God. How do you break through that shell of accumulated hurt and doubt and make those people believe, truly believe, that they are witnessing a miracle on the big screen? Because if you can't solve that riddle, if you can't make an audience put aside their disbelief and, even if only for just a moment, question their comfortable certainties about the world and buy into the idea of an honest-to-God miracle, then you're just wasting your time. You might as well be making a superhero film. But you won't come close to making something that is going to make people think, give people pause and make them question, or maybe even make them believe. And that just wasn't going to be good enough for Dreyer. He wanted to make something that was going to challenge his audience to maybe examine themselves and their place in the world and think about things a little differently. So for the majority of Dreyer's career, he was attempting to solve these riddles in his films. Riddles of technique, riddles of human psychology. He said that all of his films that are considered by film critics today to be some of the best ever made, films like The Passion of Joan of Arc, Vampire, Day of Wrath, Ordette, Gertrude. He considered all of these great films mere formal experiments to prepare him to make his ultimate film, his film about Jesus. Unfortunately, Carl Theodor Dreyer died before he ever got his chance to make that film about Jesus. But the body of work that he left us with, these are some of the greatest and most unusual films ever made. The riddles that he solved are still being studied by filmmakers to this day. He's now known for something that film scholars have dubbed the cinema of the uncanny, because these are films that really feel like they touch something outside the normal human experience. Films that can make your hair stand on end. Films that unsettle, that disrupt, that discomfort. Dreyer is just better than any other filmmaker I've ever come across at inventing these little moments of weirdness that he injects into his films almost imperceptibly. They kind of keep the viewer off balance. And he's not doing it for superficial sensory reasons either. He's not just trying to spook you. These are films that reach for something much deeper in the audience. Films that have the power to make you think, to make you question and examine things, and maybe, just maybe, films that have the power to make you believe. And even though these movies can seem as if they touch something outside the normal experience, the tools that Dreyer is using is just a little applied psychology and some imaginative film techniques that think outside the box. I'll give you a great example. There's a famous shot in his film Ordette, which, in my opinion, is very high in the running for maybe the best film ever made. And in this particular shot, a little girl has a conversation with her uncle about the fears that she has over her mother. Her mother's very close to death. While the girl and her uncle talk, the camera starts to slowly move around them. The lighting and composition draw your eye to their conversation, and while your attention is there, Dreyer uses the rest of the frame to play tricks on you. Something you might not realize when you watch the film for the first time is that the room seems to be revolving around the subjects. As the camera slowly moves around them, the rest of the room doesn't seem to track at the same speed. The way Dreyer achieved this is that he had the actors and the camera on a rotating platform inside the set, so that the whole platform is being moved by the crew, while the camera is being moved on the platform at the same time. It creates a very subtle dissonance that gives the scene an eerie quality that you can't quite put your finger on, because your subconscious mind registers the impossibility of what you're seeing before your conscious mind has a chance to catch up, to figure out what's off about the scene. It's a method of burrowing into the mind of the viewer and opening it up to accept violations of the natural order of physics, and getting us into the right frame of mind to accept the miracle he's preparing us to witness. Now, as to that specific miracle, I'm going to leave that one for the film because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I'll just say this. It's a cinematic experience unlike any other I've ever seen. And one of the things that makes it so effective, really that makes all of Dreyer's films so deeply effective, is the simple understanding that if someone were to actually have a brush with the uncanny, with the supernatural, if they were actually to witness something that seemed to defy what they knew about the physical world, that some part of that would be absolutely terrifying. Regardless of how else you might feel about it, having your sense of reality upended is something that should shake you to your very core, make you question everything that you think you know. How could that be anything but frightening? It gives a little perspective to what this whole fear of God thing is about. And all of that relates directly to the music video we're going to be discussing today.
He'd have 2 or 3 guys go out in the backyard on Perugia Way with him, and he'd have them look up at the sky. Then he'd say he'd parted the clouds or made the stars move. And he'd say, "Did you see that? He was testing us. Of course, you get enough pills in you, you can see anything.
Tupelo, Mississippi has been many things. Long ago, it was home to some of the Chickasaw and Choctaw people. Then, after the Indian Removal Act of 1830 moved the native people out of the area, the European settlers called it Gum Pond. During the Civil War, it was the site of the Battle of Tupelo, where the cavalry of General Nathan Bedford Forrest was effectively broken, and Forrest himself sustained a wound that would eventually end his military career. It was incorporated as a proper town in 1870. And in 1934, it became the very first city to get electricity from the Tennessee Valley Authority as a part of Democratic President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Rural Electrification Initiative, a project that was decried as rank socialism by the remaining Republicans in the era, but that was seen as something of a miracle by the citizens of Tupelo. 2 years later, in 1936, the city was hit with storms and floods and a tornado that is still remembered as one of the nation's most deadly. And right there in the middle of that, in 1935, Tupelo witnessed the biggest event of all, the thing that put it on the map, the birth of Elvis Aaron Presley. Though technically, that happened in neighboring East Tupelo and wouldn't be something that Tupelo proper could take credit for until it annexed East Tupelo in 1947. A lot happened in this little North Mississippi town. A lot of changes, a lot of disruption, big historical things that seem larger than life. That's why Tupelo worked its way into the mythology of the blues. John Lee Hooker wrote a song about it, specifically about the floods and tornadoes that plagued poor Tupelo. There were women and there was children, screaming and crying. Lord have mercy on a great disaster. Who can we turn to now but you, the great flood of Tupelo, Mississippi? These lyrics are describing the storms, the flood, and the tornado of Tupelo in 1936. And of course, one of those children who was screaming and crying, being held by their mother, was someone very familiar to us, just 1 year old at the time. And John Lee Hooker knew that too. There's a live recording of him performing this song in 1978, and he dedicates it to Elvis, saying, "I hope that wherever he's at, he's resting at ease." Perhaps that dedication was what inspired Nick Cave to write his song of the same name, on the same topic, that came out just a few years later in 1984. It is this Tupelo, and the music video that was created for its 40th anniversary by the filmmaker Andrew Dominik, that are the subject of today's episode. In a recent blog post about this song and the AI video inspired by it, Nick Cave had this to say: "The reason I have such regard for the song Tupelo, and why we've performed it at nearly every Bad Seeds concert since it was first written so many years ago, is that it continues to maintain its volatile urgency. Even now, to perform it feels like a kind of possession. It is a song built on a distinctive Bad Seeds bass line, predatory and relentless. And on this simple structure, an epic story unfolds. The storm of Tupelo that John Lee Hooker sang about, and the song of the same name, is merged with the birth of Elvis Presley, who was born in Tupelo as a twin, with his firstborn brother dying at birth. In the song, the flood takes on biblical proportions, descending upon the people as an annihilating force, distorting the natural order. Where no birds can fly, no fish can swim. As Elvis's tragic nativity unfolds in a clapboard shack, with a bundle and a box and a cradle of straw, the king is born. Elvis is depicted as the savior, thrown into a turbulent world to rescue it, to carry the burden of Tupelo. Elvis embodies the redeeming Christ, saving not just Tupelo, but the entire world from its sins and subsequent destruction. You don't have to necessarily buy into the Elvis as the redeeming Christ take to appreciate what Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds accomplish on this track, nor Dominik's video, which we'll discuss in greater detail in a moment. I think with this song, Cave effectively combines biblical imagery, the mythology of Elvis, and a little bit of borrowed hoodoo from the blues as a means of conjuring an experience of the uncanny. Like Carl Dreyer, he's trying to evoke that kind of awesome terror that comes from brushing up against a force much more powerful than you can comprehend. For Nick Cave, that force was rock and roll, as embodied in the form of Elvis Presley. A force as powerful as the splitting of the atom, and one that, like the A-bomb before it, was a power that shaped the second half of the 20th century, leaving a mark on everything that followed. Something so potent, so elemental, could only emerge from the same Mississippi soil that created the Delta Blues. One of the things that Cave reminds us of by fusing John Lee Hooker's blues with the story of Elvis is that for all the charges of cultural appropriation that get lobbed Elvis's way, the same storms that shook the homes of these great bluesmen also rattled Elvis's walls. He breathed the same air, walked many of the same streets, in a little town called Tupelo, a place that, in Nick Cave's interpretation, seems to be some kind of supernatural staging ground for these wild, uncanny forces, floods, tornadoes, poverty, depression. And from this torrent of wreckage and upheaval, this land of the blues, comes Elvis, the chosen of twins, the one that survived, and for a moment went on to electrify the whole damn world. Or as Nick tells the story, well, Saturday gives what Sunday steals, and a child is born on his brother's heels. Come Sunday morn, the firstborn dead, and a shoebox tied with a ribbon of red. In a shoebox tied with a ribbon of red, the casket of Jesse Garin Presley, the twin that didn't make it, buried in an unmarked grave while his identical brother went on to become the most famous man in the world. You've got to admit, the story does ring with a certain amount of biblical irony. I think that using this modern imagery is a brilliant way for Cave to translate the shock of a biblical supernatural experience to a 20th and 21st century audience. Stuff like Babylon and the Seven Seals seems ancient to us. We understand them from such a great distance that they don't immediately resonate. But Elvis and the Great Depression, those are forces the audience can grasp. After all, when this song came out in the early 1980s, folks were still very much living in the aftershocks of both. And you don't exactly have to hold your breath to feel the tremors continuing even today. When Nick and the Bad Seeds perform this song live, they sometimes use rain effects, the sounds of wind and thunder, flashes of lightning. It's as if the song is orchestrated by the elements themselves, uncontrollable natural forces. Tupelo's rhythm is wild and aboriginal, and the Bad Seeds generally perform it with the fervor of a mystical incantation, a summoning of spirits. On a good night, it can make the hair on the back of your neck stand straight up, just like Dreyer's rotating camera.
In August, in Vegas, Elvis was talking to Mario, who used to bring and serve Elvis's dinner in the suite. Elvis asked how his family was, and Mario told him that his wife was dying of cancer. And because Elvis thought he could heal the world, he said, "Look, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." He asked Mario where he lived, and a whole bunch of us got in 2 or 3 cars and went out to Mario's house. We all went in, and Elvis started talking in this real, hushed tone. He asked Mario, "Where's your wife?" Mario said, She's in the bedroom. Elvis said, I'd like to go in there and make her feel better. He was going to put his hands on her to heal her and all this other stuff. He looked around the room and he said to 2 or 3 people, come on, go with me. He glanced over at me, but he didn't bother to ask me because I had just given him a look like, I ain't going in there. And he knew I thought it was all hokum. Well, somehow the hotel got wind of Elvis going out to Mario's house. They made it seem like Mario was taking advantage of his position. So one night, somebody else brought the food up, and since Elvis insisted on having Mario all the time, he said, where's Mario? And the other waiter said, Mario doesn't work here anymore. Elvis asked why, and the guy told him he'd been fired. And Elvis blew up. That night he went on stage and lambasted Baron Hilton.
And there's a guy here that works in an Italian restaurant. His name is Mario. And these people are getting ready to fire him as soon as I leave. And I don't want him to go. I think he needs a job. And I think the Hiltons are bigger than that. You know. No disrespect, I just want to wake up Conrad and tell him about Mario's job, that's all.
So let's talk about Andrew Dominik's video for Tupelo. As I said before, the film was made for the 40th anniversary of the song and gifted to Nick Cave, who is famously skeptical about AI's usefulness for art applications. And Nick liked it so much that he posted the video to YouTube and wrote a little piece re-examining some of his attitudes about AI, which I think shows a lot of openness and maturity. Dominik's film features a lot of AI video clips rendered from archival pictures, mostly of Elvis Presley. And from the moment it was released, the video sparked a really intense reaction from the online audience, much of it very negative. That reaction made me feel compelled to come on here and talk about it a little because I think it's actually a very interesting little film. And I think the backlash to the film is so intertwined with the audience's own perceptions of and experiences with artificial intelligence that a lot of people are not seeing it for the work of art that it is. They see aspects of the AI clips that don't seem perfectly naturalistic, or recognize times that the algorithm fails to produce a result that entirely resembles Elvis, and they simply understand these as mistakes, which I would argue very much misses the point of this piece. There's a lot going on in this video that is worthy of consideration. I think it's currently a very widely misunderstood piece of art, so I will offer my humble perspective on it in hopes that it might help someone better appreciate this video for what I believe it to be. The first point that we need to get out of the way is that this is not a film made by AI. This is a film made by Andrew Dominik using AI. That's an important distinction to make. You could consider it a little like a visual collage or an artwork made from found objects. The act of selection, juxtaposition, and the manner of presentation reveal a great deal about an artist's personality and the way they see the world. But it's more complicated than that too, because in this instance, the artist exerts some degree of control over what these objects do, how they move. If you know Dominik's films, I think this little music video is actually very much of a piece with the themes and aesthetic interests that you see in his other works. And why shouldn't we expect that to be the case? When you look at the opening scenes that look like moving versions of daguerreotypes, where we see the wind providing movement as people in the frame stand still, Is it surprising that this was created by the same director who made The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford? Of course not. Nor is the video's perceptive critique of celebrity as a spiritually destructive force that erodes the object of that celebrity unfamiliar to anyone who's seen The Assassination of Jesse James or Blonde. This is the work of Andrew Dominik through and through. Dominik's approach to this film is to select imagery that contains a lot of Nick Cave's original symbolism from the song Tupelo. The black clouds of tornadoes, the floodwater, the twin babies, Jesus, Elvis. And he uses those symbols to construct motifs that carry us from image to image in a way that both creates a unified film and extends the interpretive possibilities of these symbols. For instance, he portrays the floodwaters that Nick Cave evokes as not just a source of terror and destruction, but also the waters in which Elvis is baptized. We get to see him emerging from the waters of Tupelo, as if forming before our very eyes. Having absorbed the powers of these uncanny forces at work on Tupelo, Elvis emerges ready to transform them into an equal and opposite force, to send something back into the world that contains the same kind of shock, awe, and even terror that the elements are bringing down on Tupelo. Dominik contrasts the rigid, frightened postures of the school children watching storms approaching Tupelo with the Pentecostal quaking and shaking of the teenage girls watching Elvis perform. He makes clear that both of these are forms of devastation, first tragic, then euphoric. Elvis's live performances are portrayed as a religious experience. There are multiple shots of him levitating over the audience, which makes him not only seem superhuman, but also invests the performances with a ritualistic, sacramental quality. They're as much about the euphoria of the audiences as they are about Elvis himself. This is where Cave's idea of Elvis as a Christ-like redeeming figure comes in. But Dominik keeps the video grounded by never letting you go too long or too far into the religious symbology or media iconography of Elvis before cutting back to photos of the young Elvis or his mother Gladys simply staring into the camera. A reminder that in the middle of all this mania, of all this surreality taking place, there is a very human drama that was lived by real people, a mother and a son. And of course, just as the floodwaters and tornadoes of Tupelo are shown to have created Elvis, Dominik shows us that the power of Elvis created another uncanny force that pushed back against him: celebrity. The price of all that levitating and whipping audiences into an evangelical fervor is that it changes every human interaction you'll ever have for the rest of your life. You're placed above. Every breath that you breathe is scrutinized and countered with the expectations of everyone you come across. Then come the pills. Then comes the decay. And finally, Dominik cuts from the sad, hollowed eyes of Gladys, so changed from the image of her younger self, to an image of Elvis in the last year of his life, wearing the same sad, hollowed eyes. The burden of Tupelo that Cave sings about is something passed on from generation to generation. Perhaps the dominant image from Dominik's video for me is a portrait of Elvis as a man haunted by his own celebrity. He's often shown with a heavy, burdened expression on his face. And in one of the most powerful images of the film, we see Elvis from the famous opening sequence of the 1968 comeback special, standing triumphantly with his guitar in front of a red backlit stage with thousands of little Elvises with guitars in silhouette behind him, visual manifestations of his media iconography. And as they move in the clip, they combine for a brief moment into this dark apparition that appears over Elvis's shoulder. And just as he's turning to glance its way, the apparition vanishes. It's a brilliant little shot, so much so that I kind of wonder if Dominik edited that together in post. And there's another shot from a candid of Elvis signing autographs during the filming of Girls, 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 where he sits immobile, staring into the camera with a look of paralyzed terror, while the fans around him go nuts. And this is why I suspect that many of the AI video clips that were selected for this little film were chosen precisely for the little moments of unnatural weirdness that they inject. The uncanny valley, the heads that impossibly twist, the cars that seem to shapeshift as Elvis travels backwards with a look in his eyes that is strangely sinister. All of the things that so many people will dismissively assume are mistakes actually kind of perfectly express the disorienting, surrealist dream that fame must have seemed like to Elvis. But as Cave reminds us all in the lyrics, no sleep runs this deep. Elvis's uncanny power, like one of Carl Dreyer's miracles that scares the bejesus out of you, is portrayed with a generous degree of ambiguity. It can seem awe-inspiring and holy in one moment, and dark and frightening the next. Put simply, it overwhelms. One of Elvis's favorite songs, a song that he sang often, contains a verse about this very dichotomy. Oh, John declared that he saw a man. He had 12 bright stars in his right hand, and his eyes flashed fire like the burning sun. Oh, John got scared, and he wanted to run. Well, he wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't go, 'cause he felt the gospel cutting like a two-edged sword. John was experiencing a brush with the uncanny. He was confronted with the truth of a power that was much larger than himself. The experience scared him to death. He didn't know which way to move, but he knew it wasn't something he could escape anyway. Was this man who carried the stars in his right hand going to be good for him personally? Well, from his human perspective, that seemed like it could cut either way. Like John, like Elvis, like his audiences of enraptured teenagers, we at this moment have brushed up against another uncanny force, artificial intelligence. Perhaps Andrew Dominik's greatest insight was recognizing a perfect marriage of message and medium when he saw one. We don't yet know exactly how this AI thing is going to work out, but we can already feel the two-edged sword against our back, ready to cut. We know that Elvis's 1971 studio recording of John was most inspired by a version recorded about 10 years earlier by a group called the Jubilee Four on their album Lookin' Up. But as is the case with so many of Elvis's favorite gospel songs, there's no telling when he first heard it. A song as old as John could have been something that he encountered when he was sneaking into revival tents with Sam Bell down in Tupelo. Maybe they sang it the day he was baptized, with black clouds on the horizon.
We'd be in the bus, traveling, in the early daylight hours or in the evening. We'd look up at the clouds, and Elvis would say they looked like people. Everybody who was dead. He'd say, "Oh, look, Joseph Stalin," or John F. Kennedy. Then, one time, real softly, he said, "Oh my God." Red and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Look, there I am, in the clouds."
If you haven't yet checked out Nick Cave and Andrew Dominik's Tupelo music video, I highly recommend doing it. I think it is an interesting little film and a really moving and sincere and very thoughtful tribute to Elvis Presley. I feel fortunate as an Elvis fan that there's still enough interest in him that we're getting artworks of this caliber inspired by Elvis so many years after his passing. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed my little thoughts or rambles about this music video. This is Atomic Wax for this week. And if you'd like to support us, please like, subscribe, and you can visit us on ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Atomic Wax Podcast. And you can become a member of the Atom Gang if you want to really support us. For the low price of $3.99 a month, you get bonus videos and our eternal thanks for making this show possible. So we've got a couple of bonus videos coming this month. One is going to be about why it's so difficult to capture Elvis in AI, not just for the video clips like you see in the film, but also for AI music as well. Why is it hard for AI to imitate Elvis? The reasons are more legion than you might think. And the second video we're going to do is in honor of our last video about Colonel Parker. I'm going to show you a couple of special collectibles in my collection from Colonel Parker's office. So if you're interested in that, join us in the Atom Gang, and we'd be glad to have you. Anyway, until next time, this is John, and I will catch you on the flip side.
When the